Hi, I'm Peter J Rea. Welcome to my second floor lair. You can see I'm wearing a wool cap. It's a Cleveland Browns cap. The brown, partly because it's very cold in the apartment here, and it's only 9 degrees outside here in the Cleveland area in Ohio, United States, and here in Rocky River. I'm also wearing the Browns finished their season. They went 0-16, didn't win a game, but it's loyalty is the highest law, as they say in our church. You have to be, or to quote Tug McGraw from 1973 Mets, you gotta believe, and hope springs eternal for the sports fan. We need to be hopeful. I'm wearing a T-shirt that I made for my mother and father's 50th wedding anniversary. This is it's a picture, a photograph of my mother on her wedding day, August 19th, 1950, in Regina, Saskatchewan, Canada. I don't think she ever wore this shirt, but I'm wearing it to keep the memory of my dear mother alive. So anyway, without further ado or further ado, today's topic is Resalest Remarkable Books number 21. The first book today is Po'on by F. Schoenhill, Frankie Jose, published in 1984. And this is another, Frankie Jose was this very wonderful author of novels set in the Philippines, and I really got into his books. This is the first in the Resalest saga. I believe there are maybe 5 books. The book it's a tremendous book. It starts in 1880 in the Ilocos region in northern Luzon, Philippines, and then the family moves to Pangasinan province, and then it comes to the end of the Spanish era, the Spanish tyranny, which ended in 1898, and the beginning of the American period, when Americans arrived at that same time. Apolinario Mabini, who is depicted his wisdom and in what was considered a failed revolution because Philippines didn't become independent. But this is controversial among Filipinos. They think, they were disappointed they didn't get their independence because the U.S. came. But I think the American period was very positive, and not just because I'm an American, but I think the American period from 1898 to 1946 led to a very wonderful friendship. Beautiful friendship between Americans and Filipinos, and we've helped each other, I think, in different ways. Americans helped Filipinos, and Filipinos helped Americans. The next book is Tree, again by F. Schoenhill Jose, published in 1978. This is a wonderful novel. It's the second in the Resalest saga. More insights on Philippine society, and one of the biggest issues is the great difference between the rich and the poor in the Philippines. You have tremendous wealth and horrible poverty, and of course this is a global problem of today's world. And some people are talking about economic growth. And the problem is that this income gap keeps growing between the rich and the poor, and it's something we should. It's a real dilemma because, especially when the poverty is very bad and there's hunger and people living in slums and so forth, then there's this resentment that develops. So we really need to, hopefully, if we evolve spiritually and develop simple living, and everyone can have a decent life in this world. Anyway, so the next book is Kyle Rote Jr.'s Complete Book of Soccer by Kyle Rote Jr. with Basil Kane, published in 1978. This was lent to me by my friend Brett Lesheim, who was into soccer. His father was German, was a soccer player. And anyway, I was interested. I don't know much about soccer. It was good to learn. And also the fact that in 1932, the Cleveland Shamrock won a soccer championship. And also the 1968 Cleveland Stokers won another championship. So this was interesting. Kyle Rote Sr. played in the NFL, and then his son got into soccer. The next book is I Am Spock by Leonard Nimoy, published in 1995. This is a tremendous book. Of course, Leonard Nimoy was the the actor who portrayed this wonderful character Spock, the Vulcan, in all these Star Trek episodes and movies. He tells the story behind the original TV series in the 1960s, and then the 1980s movies. Of course, it went into decline. It was when it was canceled. Star Trek was canceled. People thought it was the end, but it just took time passed, and when Star Wars came out, that kind of revived interest in Star Trek. He talks about the next generation. Of course, there have been many. You have all these other ones: Voyager, Star Trek Voyager, Deep Space Nine, and so forth. And one thing I remember about this book is, Spock is supposedly unemotional because he's a Vulcan, and then this was the character that he had to portray, and he said how it kind of was a problem in his family life with his wife and children because he would bring this home. He would be Spock at home, and that was kind of interesting. He's talking about William Shatner and DeForest Kelley and all these actors, and really interesting story. Wonderful, the Star Trek creation, the TV shows and the movies. I'm a big fan. Live long and prosper. The next book is Cleveland Sports Trivia Quiz by Tim Long, published in 1999. Yeah, well, this is an interesting, it's a short book, for these different questions. You see if you know the answers to about the different teams in Cleveland, and anyway, Tim Long had written these other short books as well. The next book is My Brother, My Executioner by F. Shonil Jose, published in 1962. This is number 3 in the Resalest saga novels, and it deals with the Huck Rebellion in the 1950s, which is very interesting. Actually, it seems like Filipinos have been in rebellion ever since the Spanish arrival, 1565, with Miguel Legazpi, and Spanish period, and then the Second World War. They're fighting the Spanish, fighting the Americans, fighting the Japanese in the Second World War, and then after the war, these Hucks were fighting for. Actually, they were linked to the communist movement, and let's face it, there's hocus pocus in life, and when we mistreat each other, when people try to get too much, then individuals or organizations are formed, which have the idea of a radical solution, which actually makes things worse. So we really need to avoid these political disasters, which really communist revolutions are, by caring about each other. And so anyway, this is a wonderful book. In the title, you get the idea. My Brother, My Executioner. We need to love each other. We need to be kind. We need to care. Stop being so greedy. We need to care about each other. The next book is Plain Speaking by Harry S. Truman and Merle Miller, published in 1973. Of course, this is an oral biography of Harry Truman. He became U.S. President in 1945 when President Franklin D. Roosevelt died. So he was vice president, and then he was elected on his own in 1948, and then finished in early 1953. Good fella from Missouri. There's a wonderful biography of him by David McCullough. I love the cover of it. Anyway, Truman was a very dedicated public servant, believed in doing the right thing. He had a tough thing with Douglas MacArthur, who was this famous war hero. They had a tough conflict. He's a good man. Harry Truman, very good man. The next book is The Pretenders by F. Shonil Jose, published in 1962. You can see I was really getting carried away with these F. Shonil Jose books. I was in the Philippines, so it was good to learn more about the Philippines, read about books set in the Philippines. And these are fairly short. They're about 200 pages, as I recall, maybe a little longer, but not too hard, very entertaining, and very interesting. And in this one, you have the story of a poor man and a rich woman who have a relationship that does not work out. There's plenty of tragedy, and the issue of comfort and security versus justice and social change. Again, social change, you're talking about really the communist movement. And I think, yeah, the whole communist movement is very tragic, and I definitely got wrapped up in it because I found it very attractive, very seductive, and it appeals to idealistic people who care. And but regardless, even though Frankie Jose is promoting the communist movement, I believe his books are wonderful. They're very good, and we should prevent communist revolutions from taking place. And capitalism will fail if the rich don't care about the poor. People who make a lot of money, they should use it, and very often they do. There's been a lot of wonderful philanthropy performed by wealthy individuals for the public good. The next book is If at First by Keith Hernandez and Mike Bryan, published in 1987. Keith Hernandez was the first baseman on the New York Mets, who won the World Series in 1986. He also played for the St. Louis Cardinals. He had a pretty nice mustache, and then the Cleveland Indians signed him. Later, he played for Cleveland. He was a free agent, but then he got hurt. He didn't do very well. We actually had 3 players on the 80s from the 86 Mets. We had Jesse Orosco and later Dwight Gooden. So anyway, Keith Hernandez says that was a really memorable team, the 86 New York Mets. The next book is The Choice by Bob Woodward, published in 1996. This is a book about the 1996 U.S. presidential election, in which Bill Clinton was nominated. He was up for re-election as the Democratic nominee, and then you had Bob Dole, who became the Republican nominee. Then the others were Phil Gramm, who ran, Pat Buchanan, of course, who's actually an interesting fellow, written some history books, Steve Forbes, who was a wealthy businessman who threw his hat in the ring. So it was an interesting election. Actually, Clinton won pretty easily, despite his problems with women, these different scandals with women, because he was so charismatic and a very likable fellow, Bill Clinton. So Bob Woodward did a good job here in this book. The next book is Mass by F. Shonil Jose, published in 1982. This is the last book in the Resalest saga. It tells the story of a fellow named Pepe Sampson, who was from the province, or what they call the province in the Philippines, which would be the countryside, who moved to Tondo, which is this very poor part of Manila. And there's plenty of revolutionary activity and insights on Philippine culture. And it seems like there's constant political problems in the Philippines going back to the Spanish era, and people believing in a political solution or a radical political solution, and when actually we can never have good government unless we change, and we all need to change. We can only change one person at a time. All you can do is change yourself. We keep expecting, putting our hopes in political candidates, and of course we should use judgment when we vote for candidates, but we shouldn't put too much hopes in politics and in government, because we have to change. People need to change. But anyway, that's been the common thing. People get into revolutions, but the inner revolution is the one that's the most important, in my opinion. The next book is The Browns, Cleveland's Team by Richard Schmelter, published in 1999. And more books on the old Cleveland Browns before they came back. Otto Graham, Marion Motley, we want to talk about him more, who was this tremendous running back. He actually got a late start in pro football. He was something else, and I believe he had a higher average yards per carry than Jim Brown. He's kind of forgotten because he's overshadowed by Jim Brown, and he played 4 years in the AAFC, and I think he was a rookie when he was 28, when they finally were letting African Americans play in the NFL. Of course, other fellows, Jim Brown, Brian Sipe, Bernie Kosar, and I was reading this book because I had this Cleveland City of Champions project I was working on. The next book is The Forest by William J. Pomeroy, published in 1963. This is a tremendous book, Wonderful book. It's a personal record of the Huk guerrilla struggle in the Philippines. And this Bill Pomeroy was the only American to join the Huk rebels. And so he was a dedicated communist. And again, even though I'm an anti-communist, I have respect for them. And this Bill Pomeroy was a very good man, very idealistic fellow, and he decided to join the communist rebels in the Philippines. And he and his Filipino wife, they nearly starved, living because they were living in the jungle, and they're fighting the Philippine army. And eventually he was arrested. They got caught. Him and his wife got caught, and he spent 10 years in prison in the Philippines. And then because his wife they were both communists, he could have come to the U.S., but his wife was denied a visa because the U.S. was anti-communist. So they ended up moving to Great Britain and lived in England for the rest of their life. So anyway, I think I admire. I have friends today because back when I was in college, I was attracted to the communist movement. I have friends today who are still support this, and I disagree with them, but I respect them, and I understand where they're coming from. And anyway, William Pomeroy was not a bad guy. I think communism is terrible what it does, but an awful lot of good people have gotten involved with communism. Of course, he never lived to see the communist revolution succeed in the Philippines and find out what would have happened if they got what they wanted. The next book is Cleveland, where the East Coast meets the Midwest. What a snappy title, catchy title. Anyway, I was really interested in reading about Cleveland here. Euclid Avenue, they call the part toward downtown, they called Millionaires Row. One time it was called the most beautiful street in the world. And then the Terminal Tower, which is so iconic, this beautiful building in downtown Cleveland. And League Park, where the Indians used to play. The air races, which were actually airplane races, real popular. Elliot Ness, who was a great, wonderful crime fighter, really good fella. And they made a TV show called The Untouchables, where he's depicted. And Elliot Ness, he was real famous. And then there was Tom Johnson, who was a great mayor way back when. So a lot of good stuff. This author, Peter Jeddick, did a good job. The next book is All Too Human by George Stephanopoulos, published in 1999. Stephanopoulos was an advisor for President Bill Clinton, and he was an important part of the Bill Clinton administration. And so this is what he's writing about. And Stephanopoulos was a Greek fella, and I think I don't know if it had anything to do with Michael Dukakis becoming the nominee in 88. But anyway, this is all about his inside look at the Bill Clinton administration. And, Stephanopoulos has gone on. You'll still see him around. He's interviewed on these various news stations as like a political expert, George Stephanopoulos. And he was fairly young when he got involved. Of course, Clinton was young too. Clinton was in his 40s. I think Stephanopoulos was in his 30s when he was, advising Bill Clinton. The next book is Platinum, 10 Filipino Short Stories by F. Shonil Jose, published in 1983. Well, you can see, boy, I read an awful lot of the books by Frankie Jose. I was really obsessed with them. And I would write him letters. I wrote him letters, and he answered them. I was really thrilled. And actually, I met him one time. He had a bookstore, and then we met him in his bookstore, and we went out for merienda or snack with his wife. And there's this food in the Philippines called ensaymada. It's kind of like a roll with that has cheese and sugar on top, and it's very, very, very tasty. And then he asked. I was talking about how wonderful Filipino people are, and of course, no people is perfect. And he says, I'm going to show you tell you all about Filipino people. And his wife was shaking her head like, no, don't do that. He said, can I borrow your ensaymada? I said, sure. I hadn't eaten it yet. And then he said, Filipinos are very sweet on the outside. Like this, he said, and he took his fork, and he pushed down on the fork, and he said, but they're full of hot air on the inside. And he pushed down on the fork on the inside. And ensaymada is a very light, food, light bread. That was pretty funny. His wife wasn't too happy that he kind of mashed up my ensaymada, but I was okay with it. The next book is Gamba, the Spider-Man, by F. Shonil Jose, published in 1991. This is a short novel about, Frankie Jose tends to be against the rich Filipinos. And this book, he's critical of them, the rich and powerful Filipinos. And in this book, they all meet their death in an exclusive restaurant on a Sunday afternoon when an earthquake came and I guess the restaurant collapsed. I think the Philippines is still struggling with the Spanish legacy. The Spanish didn't have the rule of law, and they were cruel, and they came really to enslave Filipinos so they could become wealthy as individuals. And so, we all need to change. And I'm really against this anti-rich stuff that actually it's all over the world, this anti-rich sentiment, which I think partly is based on jealousy. Yeah, there are rich people who've been selfish, but an awful lot of rich people have done a lot of good. I know John D. Rockefeller, the richest man in history, he did an awful lot of good. And so it's kind of easy to do because it appeals to the poor, blaming the rich. Anyway, the next book is Municipal Stadium, Memories on the Lakefront, edited by George Cormack, 1999, a 50-year pictorial history, 1931 to 1981. This is about Cleveland Municipal Stadium. Had 420 photographs from the Cleveland Press, the old newspaper. And it's gone now. They tore it down and they built this, what they called Cleveland Browns Stadium, changed the name to First Energy Stadium. I had a lot of fond memories going down there with my father, Cleveland Municipal Stadium, watched the Indians play back in the 70s, saw a few Browns games, and actually I went to a Monday Night Football game with my friend Brent last time, and the 1986 AFC Championship game, which, the playoff game before that against the Jets when the Browns won in double overtime. The next book is Conversations with F. Shonil Jose, edited by Miguel Bernard, published in 1991. And so, as you can see, another book about this fellow, this wonderful author in the Philippines. And I was really thrilled that he would write. He was writing to me, and we had a nice correspondence. I believe he's still alive. He's a political force in the Philippines, and hopefully we can all benefit from each other. And he had a contribution to make. These are very readable books, and I have a lot of respect for F. Shonil Frankie Jose. The next book is Once a Bum, Always a Dodger, by Don Drysdale, published in 1990. Well, Don Drysdale was a pitcher for the Los Angeles Dodgers in the late 1950s into the 60s. And so they used to call the Brooklyn Dodgers, they called them bums, because they would lose in the World Series so many times. I don't think they call them that anymore. And then it was a very traumatic move from Brooklyn, New York to Los Angeles, especially for the folks in Brooklyn who lost their beloved Dodgers. And of course, LA has had that team, and they've been there so long in LA now, Los Angeles. And so it's an interesting topic. This Don Drysdale was a TV fellow. I think he got into broadcasting TV games. So he was a real good pitcher, especially in the 1960s. The next book is Viajero by F. Shonil Jose, published in 1993. I thought this was the best of all his books. At least I felt so at the time. It's a panorama of Philippine history, and it depicts a Filipino-American who returned to discover his country and die for it. Yeah, so this is wonderful. Especially it appealed to me since I'm an American. It was in the Philippines many years. and I might go back. We'll have to see what happens here. I've been gone for 4 years now, and so yeah, I love F. Shoni Jose's books. Wonderful author, and he's the most prolific and author, novelist of, as far as I know, in the Philippines. You'll see him in the bookstores, I think. I don't know, because it used to be you go to the bookstore, you'll see his books out there. Did a really good job. Very good man. Wonderful man. F. Shoni Jose. Frankie Jose. The next book is The Peloponnesian War by Thucydides, published in 400 BC. Now, the Peloponnesian War was fought in ancient Greece between the ancient Greek city-states of Sparta and Athens, and it was a disaster for the ancient Greeks. Very tragic. And it really led to their downfall. You know, it was like a Greek civil war, and it led to them being conquered by the Roman Empire. They were very talented people. This was such a tragic thing. I had an uncle who came. One of my mother's favorite stories was when our family reunions. This uncle Bill Smith, who was a history teacher, and one day we were at a family reunion in Lakeside, Ohio, sitting on the porch, and Bill Smith walked into the porch and he said, does anyone know anything about the Peloponnesian War? And nobody said anything. I guess they didn't. So he proceeded to deliver an impromptu lecture. And it was very funny. My mom she loved telling that story. And I was very young. I think I was just a kid, so I don't think I listened to it too bad, because later I really got into history. And this Thucydides is one of the great ancient Greek authors, historians. Did a good job here. It reminds me of this class I took at Cleveland State University. The professor was saying, the ancient Greeks were on top of the world. What was this guy? He was a Romanian fella. Really interesting fella. On top of the world. This is before the Peloponnesian War. And then he looked around and said, anybody? And he was referring to actually a song by Karen Carpenter. You know, it was the same, this song, On Top of the World. And then he says, when you think about it, Karen Carpenter's death really focused the public attention on anorexia for the first time. And then he shook his head a little bit, and then he said, the ancient Greeks were on top of the world. And, of course, this refers to the time before the Peloponnesian War, because after that, they weren't on top of the world anymore. The next book is Sins by F. Shoni Jose, published in 1996. This was, when I read this book, it was, I believe, the last of all the books that I could find by him, although I think I was mistaken, because, you keep looking around. And I was looking forward to visiting him in his bookstore on Padre Faura Street in Ermita. I don't know. I remember he was influential in the 2010 election. I think he was promoting Gilbert Teodoro for president. He didn't win. I don't know. I have to Google F. Shoni Jose and see how he's doing, see if he's still alive, because boy, I really enjoyed his books. They're really very, very entertaining and interesting. The next book is Way Way and Other Short Stories by F. Shoni Jose, published in 1980. So you can see I found another book by Frankie Jose, and so that's how it was. These are short stories by Frankie Jose, and they're pretty sad. Sad stories. Tragedy is one of the themes he gets into frequently. Well, we're out of time. Thank you very much for watching. I really appreciate it. I hope you find a good book to read, and live long and prosper. May the force be with you. God bless the Philippines, America, and the whole world. See you next time.